And I know I put the botanic names on there, which is a little bit harder to say or remember, but this is a really great, great fall color. And then Sporobolus is also a native grass. It's prairie drop seed. So these are all just super tough, super dry, and great ornamentals. And then there's a number of underused plants, and this goes back to like, there's not a lot of sources that are growing the things that we need. There are, but maybe they're not as commonplace, like if you wouldn't find these at Lowe's, per se, or Home Depot. Baptisia is a really beautiful plant, and it's in the bean family, and a lot of the legumes or the Fabaceae family, they do very well out here. And this, you can see, it's got this purple flower. It also comes in a yellow flower. And so I would use this in place of, say, forsythia, because it takes less water, it's still got a nice spring bloom, and it's got a really nice soft foliage. It's about 3 by 3. It can be up to 5 by 5. And then the limonium, which is the sea lavender, isn't commonly found in retail, but it can be found, and you often see it in floral arrangements, but it's a dry-loving plant that flowers and flowers, and when it's done flowering, it holds the bloom and has an interest through the fall and into the winter. So, and both of those plants can take salt and spray and pollution, so really tough and underused plants. And then, as I mentioned, the steppe, this is a picture of the steppe garden that we have at Denver Botanic Gardens, one of 5. I believe we have, so there's South Africa, Patagonia, Mongolia, what was the other one? Central Asia, and here in North America are all steppes. So, but there's all different plants there, right? So, for example, these are some of my favorites. The red hot poker, Niphophia, which is kind of a fun one to say, Niphophia. It's a beautiful, really kind of exotic looking plant that does well with very low water. And it's native to South Africa. The Diascia, Coral Canyon, that is a plant select plant. It blooms and blooms and blooms nonstop, and it's absolutely stunning and underused, but that is also from Africa. These are 2 perennials. So beyond plants and plant selection, I think one thing that we should talk about is how do we prepare our gardens? And so if you were planting rhododendrons, you would have to put in compost and acidify the soil and peat and so on. But when you're planting out here, you want to be planting xeric plants, right? So most of our plants on Plant Select, or the plants that I've been talking about, don't do well with compost or manure or additions to the soil. They like a lean soil. They like it lean, and they like a lot of drainage. And that's what we have. So really don't need to add a lot of amendment. If anything, what often we'll need to add is something for drainage, because there can be some clay, probably not as bad out here. And the other thing is weed management, which is an issue that a lot of people, when we get into maintenance, they can get pretty, there's a lot of invasive weeds, right? And it's sunny and it's hot, and there's very few people that want to go out in the medians and pull those weeds. So I advise taking a preventative approach. If you're going to do a planting in a median, dare I say, use herbicide before you plant to get rid of all of that seed that's in the soil that's remaining and waiting to come up. And then when you plant, you're not going to have as much competition of those weeds coming up. So preventative approach is, I think, the best way to handle things. The other thing you want to do is wrap your trees. When they're young trees, if you don't wrap them in the wintertime, because it does get warm, it's still sunny, it can get up to 40, but it's just intense UV, they can get sun scald, and that'll ruin your tree. So you don't want to leave it on. You have to take it off in the spring, because that otherwise it'll allow like fester and allow for insects or pests or fungus and that sort of thing. So you have to remove the wrap, but it's important to do that upon installation. So watering is obviously the big concept here. There are xeric plants, and then there's plants that like dry, and then there's moderate. I kind of think of it as a scale of plants that you can install. So if you look at the weeping spruce, you're probably going to need to water that, say, twice a week. But what you'd want to do is plant other plants that are needing that same amount of water in groups, so that when you put your irrigation in, you can zone it. So this group is the water-loving plant, and it gets extra water. And then you've got your dry or low water plants that will still need water once a week. And this is all after the plants are established. A lot of people want to have asked me if they can plant and not water, and will the plant live? No, there's no plants that's going to do that. You have to water and establish these plants, but like after 3 years, let's say, the xeric plant is probably not going to need any water except for supplementally during a drought, during many days of 90 degrees plus weather. The dry or low water plant, after established, might need some more supplemental watering as well, but it won't need regular irrigation at the level that you have to do when you first do the first 3 years of planting, right? So, let's see. So this is like my water timeline, right? The first year you have to water, and irrigation systems are a good thing, and without them, you're likely going to lose a lot of your plants, right? So you're going to water for their establishment. One thing to note is if you plant plants smaller, they're going to establish more quickly because they don't have to make up for what's on top as fast. So like the roots on the bottom will have time to establish at the same time as the shoots, right? And also they're not going to be in shock. When you put a big tree or a huge shrub, a 5-gallon shrub in, and you water it, it's not going to grow any faster than if you put in a 3-gallon shrub and water it, because that plant is making up its roots in the ground, the 5-gallon shrub. So you're not going to see the growth on top. So you might as well plant the smaller plant because they're both going to be the same height in the long run. So year 2, you're going to reduce the watering. Year 3, you're still going to be watering. And then for the projects that I told you about on Colfax and the 3-mile median, we intend to turn that water off after the 3rd year. So the plants that we've selected will not be watered regularly. They will be watered supplementally. So when we have a drought and we have 3 weeks of 90-degree weather, we're going to need to water the trees, and we're going to need to water some of the plants. But we're trying to make it such that the water that we do get, even if it's the 12 inches or the 15 inches that we get a year, these plants will be fine. So that's really a lot of the projects that I work on as our goal, is to have water turned off. So we were having a discussion earlier today about Tucson. Has anyone been to Tucson and seen their landscaping? And then maybe if you've gone to Phoenix, you've seen their landscaping and how very different those plants are. Well, I think Tucson's done a great job, and they were sort of forced into it because they don't have a lot of water and less population. So they've embraced their Western aesthetic, and the plants you see there, you know you're in Tucson. You're not like, oh, am I in the Midwest or wherever? And if you go to Phoenix, I think you see a lot more lawns and turf and maybe things that require a little bit more water. And I think we have something to take from Tucson. And I think that Colorado has been using a lot of the Midwestern plants for a long time. And I think we need to shift that thinking to embrace what I think is a very beautiful aesthetic with the textures and the plants that cannot grow in the Midwest. So, so for just an example, in the beginning I talked about xeriscape being dry and dull and rocks. This is our water smart garden at Denver Botanic Gardens in full bloom. And I don't think it's anything like that dry, boring desert landscape that people might envision. This does get regular water. It is irrigated weekly, once a week. But that's a lot of color and a lot of texture.
20 years ago, 15 years ago, I was going, oh, I want those big flowers for customers. And I put this in my yard, and it is fantastic. It attracts hawk moths and hummingbirds. It gets about 3 feet tall, and you can see why they call it red bird in a tree. It blooms June to frost. It takes it very xeric. You could put it on a berm. You know, it doesn't like flat areas as much. It doesn't like being in the winter under snow. And so a lot of times, I think you guys have better snow melt than we do up in Fort Collins, but I always think about when I put these really xeric plants, they don't like the winter snow on top of them, and this is one of them. But you just cut it back every spring, and away you go again. You'll have this plant probably about for 10 years. But it's a native to New Mexico and Mount Cook. This one is native to over by between the Baltic and the Caspian Sea on a mountain range. It's a selection of Echium called Echium rusica, and it's a compact form, and it'll only get to about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. It's a very interesting, unique plant, and when you bring these unique plants into a plant palette of a landscape, you are identifying with something unique. This is a plant I could totally see growing in Cortez, and people thinking that it only grows in Cortez. You know, they have it over in Durango at the Botanic Gardens, but it'll bloom May into July. If you want to keep it blooming, you'll have to deadhead it, but it's not a long-lived perennial, and after it's finished blooming, it turns really brown. And what I usually do is wait till it gets just brown enough so that I can't handle it anymore, and then I deadhead it, and then spread the seed around in garden areas that I have empty spots where I find other things are struggling to grow. But this is a fantastic plant as well, Zone 4. This one I have seen, the store down the street has this in a pot. It looks like it's been there for several weeks. I think it's in front of the quilting store, as a matter of fact. And this is partridge feather, Tenacedum densum. The flowering season is June, but who cares about the flower, because it's just a little itty bitty yellow flower. It stays this frosted, textured feather plant for all year round, all the way through the winter. And in the summertime, when it blooms, I usually just, after they're done, cut them down with the trimmer really quickly. I don't even pick up the mess. And that plant will grow to about 10 inches tall it can get, and then it'll grow to 2-3 feet if it really likes where it lives. That's one of the best used plants. And there's Dioecia, the Coral Canyon twin spur, right behind it, a perfect combination. And Annie talked I was going to take out, but you can see it close. Plants is, you see this, and I remember seeing this plant for the first time thinking, it's so delicate. I'm going to have to protect it. We have to stop thinking like that. We need to challenge our plants. And this plant will grow in a container above ground for years. And it will grow in a very dry spot. And Annie had a picture where it was across Kendrick Lake, and it blooms. Grows to about 1.5 feet. Just a gorgeous plant, very xeric. It's from the high plains of South Africa. This is Kendrick Lake. This is Kirk Fiesler. Anybody who knows little dwarf conifers, he's the dwarf conifer person for Colorado. And he's staring at Kendrick Lake, and that there is the Vermilion Bluffs Mexican sage, which is native to New Mexico. You can see how large that gets. It's a tender 5. In Fort Collins, it sort of struggles, but it'll get to about 4 or 5 feet tall and blooms August to October, and those red flowers are actually edible. If you suck the back end, it tastes like honeysuckle, but you'll find the hummingbirds just visiting this all the time. The flower stems usually go far above the plant. The foliage part of the plant will only get to about 2.5 feet, but a fantastic, completely xeric plant once it's established. This is one of my other favorites. It's a native plant to Colorado, Canna Creek. It's up here, pulled from near Grand Junction. On the right-hand side, you can see that it blooms May to June in yellow, and it'll get to another 1.5 feet tall, 10 inches or something, 10 to 1.5 feet. And then when it's finished blooming, those seed heads can also, or those flowers can turn a little bit of a red. And if you're a hiker and you walk around this area, you're going to find buckwheat growing, and you might find different varieties that have different colors in them. We selected the yellow one. It's very hardy, and in the wintertime, when you trim it back, you see that purple foliage? That is beautiful. And that purple foliage and that plant can grow to about 2.5 feet wide in a place it likes. This is Denver daisy. I put this in here because it's more of an annual, a zone 6, and some of the times you'll get some of them to come back, but it's perfect for your pots, your areas that you just need color in August because it'll bloom all summer. It gets about 2 feet tall. But this plant, Denver daisy, I also put it in there because there's 1 cent royalty on it. And we sell, this is, of the 153, this is number 12 on our list for sales. And why do I mention that? It's because sales is sort of business. It's how we keep going. And I want you to support this program instead of going to Home Depot and looking at a tag and looking at a picture and thinking, this is for me. If you see the logo Plant Select, you're going to say, that is for me. And then decide how you're going to use it with combination of your rest of your garden. Here's another native plant. Amsonia jonesii, the Colorado Desert Blue Star. Blooms in April to June, and it is about 2 feet tall by 2.5 feet wide. It can take part shade. Most of the stuff we do is almost full sun. And the reason is when the program started 20 years ago, there was a lot of new development. There wasn't a lot of shade, but now as the Front Range is totally developed, I have to actually build trial gardens for shade plants. And that'll be challenging. I haven't done it yet. But this one can take part shade, and it does very nicely. After it's established, I wouldn't water it. It's a great texture plant with long pointed leaves. In the fall, it turns kind of a brown color. But it's a native to up between Montrose and Grand Junction. So this plant here is the Mongolian Bell's clematis. These are not your typical traditional clematis that climb up lattices, that like sunny tops and cool feet. This is a bush clematis, and it's going to get about 1.5 feet tall. So there's a gentleman out in Nebraska who's passed away now named Harlan Hammernick, and he used to go to Mongolia all the time when you could get plants and people wouldn't give you a hard time about bringing them back into the States. So he picked up this. It's Mongolian Bells. That's what he named it. And in the springtime, it's going to come up as a rush of green, and then the flowers will start to come on like this and tip over, and the petals kind of curl. Then it'll actually start to fall over. And at that time, you can decide to cut it all the way back, and then it'll do it again. Or you can just leave it like that, and then it'll get the typical clematis sort of clematis seed head on there, which is great texture. So with plants that kind of aren't all sturdy and they kind of lodge a lot of times, in a garden or in another situation, I'd put them next to stronger plants that are sturdier, like Amsonia jonesii. I like that Colorado Desert Blue Star. This would go just perfect next to that. So this one is Amchusa capensis. It's summer forget-me-not. This one's from South Africa as well. And if you like little dainty flowers, these are only about a 1/4 inch in diameter. And I put it up there really close so that you could see a bee at least, because it is a big bee attractor. It gets to 2 feet tall. It's not a long-lived plant. It seeds around a little bit, but it likes it dry. The stems are a little bit furry. They're kind of like a cat's tongue, and same with the leaves. Little sticky sort of, not like, you know how cat's tongues are. You rub them in there, you can feel them. They grip to you. But I put this plant up there because it's a really underutilized plant, and there's a study that was done that showed that this was one of the best pollinator plants of Plant Select. Another fantastic edible plant. Really underused. You can actually buy the seed for this and plant it like that. This is the curly leaf sea kale, Cramby marittima. And in May, that plant to the left is about 2 feet around, and it's just covered in flowers. What I really like about this plant is it's a dry, edible perennial, like kale. You can eat the flower buds before they go to flower if you so choose, and they taste like somewhere between asparagus and broccoli. So I had my mom, who we have family in Alabama, cook up some of these leaves. You see that leaf on the right? It's a steel blue, and it's really thick, and it's about this big. And you can chop those up, and I'm hoping we can make some sort of Colorado collard greens, you know, bacon and all the bad stuff for you, butter. But this plant is totally underutilized, and in an ornamental situation, it's very textured. Just don't water it that much. You may think that the big leaves, it might need more water. I used to maintain this plant at Denver Botanic Gardens, and when it got too much water, the leaves would rot out in the summertime. So this is another fantastic plant that should really be everywhere. This is Mojave sage, Salvia pachyphylla. It's deer resistant, 1.5 2 feet maybe. When the heat comes on, it blooms this beautiful sort of purple color. Now there's a trick to this plant that makes it so special, is that you can see the little itty bitty, let me see, those would be like violet flowers. They're really little. And then you have those large sort of flowers. Those aren't flowers. Those are support the flowers. So what happens when you get these kinds of plants, flower, and they attract pollinators and everything else, the petals fall off, and then the bracts change a different color, so the plant looks like it's blooming for the rest of the season. In fact, it's a beautiful plant, and this is completely xeric. Once you this plant, except deadheaded in the spring, and wonderful. Anybody familiar with this other native? Everybody's going to say, oh, you're so into natives, but I'm actually not. I'm into dry, great plants. This plant is native to the eastern plains, the chocolate flower. If you haven't tried this, this is another one. If you're complaining about prices or anything like that, you can get it from in seed, and you can lay it out. But it'll spread a little bit. It goes to seed once you get it started. You won't need to irrigate this after it's established, and it'll get to about 1.5 foot high. It leans a lot, and it just keeps leaning over. It blooms all summer long, and in the morning and in the evening, when you walk by, you're going to smell Hershey chocolate bar. So I would put it up by the door is where I would put it. Full sun. There it is up close, and you can see off to the left the petals have kind of shriveled down, and it's going to go into a seed head. But that's just a fantastic plant. I don't think you can get enough of it, and being native, it would be fantastic. I put this plant in. This is a fairly new plant. It was released 2 years ago in 2017, and I did this because I know of a place here that I call Shangri-La. And this is a Salvia Mucrofiana. It's a hybrid, and it gets really large. It looks completely exotic. It's very xeric, but it will need some water. This plant gets kind of big. It gets to 3.5 feet. The texture of the leaves get about this big. They're kind of white on the bottom, and then they're green on the top, and they have a frilly edge, and so you get to see a really cool texture. And then in spring to summer, it blooms like that, and then I would deadhead it down to the leaves and leave it just as just a low-lying plant. But when you look at those flowers, it's a salvia-looking flower that's probably 1 inch long, that's white and has the veins of purple. Yeah, and here's another native plant. You guys are tired of that, but this native plant is Engelmann daisy, and in Denver they're starting to use it more for medians instead of using daylilies, instead of using coreopsis and things like that. Completely xeric plains plant, gets 2.5 feet tall again, blooms in May to frost. Just a fantastic another option. Now I'm going through the plants sort of fast because you know what? All these resources are right online. And I want you to look at plants differently. My job sort of as Plant Select is one, promoting our plants, but I have to actually change people's mind about what we're doing in our landscapes. So this is one of my most favorite plants. It's the fern bush. And it flowers like right in the end of July, early August. And if you like insects and entertainment for grandkids or whatever, this is the plant. Because you get flowers that are, clusters of flowers that are probably about 6 inches in tall, and they're really small flowers, and you will get more bumblebees, fleas, earwigs, predatory spiders. And I say these things because they're not going to bother you, but it is so interesting. You can get your camera right up close and take pictures. And they're all sort of fighting for space in this plant. But this is a woody shrub, and it'll get big after a while. It could get 7 feet tall. But what I recommend on this shrub is every year you actually have to trim it. And I would trim it at least 6 inches, maybe 8, and let it down, because you want to increase the branching structure. This plant is native to Nevada and northern California, and when it gets larger and you don't maintain it with shearing, then it actually becomes really open and it kind of goes, ugh. Now this plant will take no water after it's established, and it's almost evergreen. Those little, you'll see green leaves, specks, all the way down the stems, all the way through the winter. And I forgot there was something else I was going to mention about that plant. For medians, so Fort Collins actually has their plant palette out, and they're keeping track of the salt-tolerant plants. Like when they put them out and then they go out and they are doing de-icing and everything through the winters, they're measuring which plants they think are dying because of that practice. This one is one of the best survivors. They said it's their #1 surviving plant on all their medians. So it's a great plant, but besides that, it's beautiful and it's interesting. This is another plant I think you guys could utilize totally the heck out of. This is what we'd also call a nativar. A nativar is like a cultivar, but it's native. It's a selection of a native plant. And this is Rus trilobata, which you guys have here. It's the common, they call it, I think, skunk bush actually, but it has really glossy green leaves, 3 of them per stem, and it lays really low on the ground. And this is a very drought tolerant plant, and it's perfect for cascading down hillsides. It's so wonderful. And then it also has a flower aspect to it that attracts native bees, which I learned just this spring. And in the fall, you will get sort of that burnt, autumn amber color. But a fantastic plant for medians and for spaces that you just need to cover the ground. And it's easy to maintain. I was learning today that you can actually basket weave with that stuff. So I thought, that's awesome. I have kids and I like plants I can do stuff with. This is another very, very useful plant in an urban environment. This is the woodward juniper. So woodward juniper was discovered in a hedgerow in Kansas. And if you've ever had a chance to listen to Scott Skogerbo speak, he's been down here. He spoke several years ago at the Botanic Gardens in Durango. But he goes up to a research station that shut off their water in the 1970s. They closed down. They turned it off. And 20 years later, he was intrigued with what's growing there. And these were some of the plants that he found. So woodward juniper is a very narrow growing juniper scapularum, which is the western juniper. And just for reference, on that far left picture, see the fence post? That's up in Cheyenne. See the white tip on that fence post way down low at the bottom of that second juniper? Those are like 20 feet tall growing in Cheyenne, where there's constant wind and snow and everything. That's probably been 20, 30 years those have been there, and nothing's happened to them except they've just stayed narrow and erect. The one in the middle is at Scott's house, actually, and the one on the right side is at a designer's house who really utilizes natives and plant select plants really well. But what I've noticed with this plant is when I look at plants, I'm looking at, do they like where they are? How much water are they getting? When I see these plants now, I can almost tell you how much water they're getting. And the far ones on the right, see how columnar they are? And at the base, they're not really grown out. The plant doesn't have the energy to put the growth into the lower parts. Now, the one in the middle, Scott mowed because he had to get the mower by. But the one on the right, she waters that like once a week. And you can see at the bottom, and all the ones that I've seen around that get water, you'll see them shaped more pyramidal than just columnar. But I mention that because we're starting to see that with grasses. I can tell you in medians when I drive by, Annie brought up the the little blue stem grass, and I can see, well, they're still watering, there's still drip on that, because those plants should be erect. And we got to remember that when you stop watering, you're reducing your maintenance, because those plants aren't going to grow. So we should, another argument for reducing your watering, and then another argument on top of that would be to reduce your weeds, because weed germination occurs when the temperature and the soil and the light conditions all occur at the right time. Well, if you're watering throughout the summer, there's going to be a time when that actually matches up, and those seeds from the weeds are going to germinate and pop up. So by reducing your watering, you're going to reduce your weeds. This is, it's a hard picture to see, but this is Panchito manzanita. This is a game changer for Colorado, if you ask me, because this is a plant that has a style of the mountains and the plains. It's a broadleaf evergreen that grows on the ground. It can grow up to like 2 feet. The bark is caramel, smooth bark. It's beautiful. I can't wait till we find something that grows really upright. And you guys might have some out here. Out in California, they grow 6, 8 feet tall, and they're just gorgeous. But the leaves are evergreen. And look at this. They put it in the medians up there in Fort Collins. It doesn't like the salt so much, so you have to be careful of that. But that plant will grow out and cover 6 feet on all the way around. It's a fantastic plant, and in the spring, it's one of the only plants that will bloom like in February or even like in late November. And it puts on these little itty bitty flowers that hang upside down, and they're white and pink. So if you're concerned about pollinators, that's a plant that'll get pollinators through if it warms up and these things flower. They can find some food there. This is another median. That picture is hard to show, but on the back side is that Panchito, but on the front side, that's a purple mass of that Canna Creek buckwheat. And that is just such a stellar plant. I can't tell you enough that everybody should be using it. The purple is just fantastic in the winter. So this is where I kind of go off tangent on plants, because I have to change your minds. When you look at a building like this, what do you think? You think, well, somebody may be doing something illegal in there, so they had to like bury it with shrubs and things like that. But this is the Pueblo Public Works, Waterworks. Those are all shrubs, and then they have a low ground cover that's green up front. But we need to start changing our minds about these trees and turf and start thinking, you know what, that's okay. And you know what, that's really not a ton of maintenance, because I know they don't have a lot of people and staff to maintain all that stuff either. But when you have shrubs, you can move through things quickly, and they take up a lot of area. You can have a lot of texture. So looking at that, I want to change minds. And then here's another one. This is a friend of mine who's doing gardening on the side, and he does landscapes. Now, you know when you drive down those streets and you see that one yard that has no lawn, and you go, oh, it's that guy. He's going to be the guy that's going to talk to me about pollinators or something like that. But it's okay. This is the wave of the future. If you don't have kids or dogs, this is a great thing. It's beautiful. It's xeric. And the funny thing about it is that he goes and says, gosh, I have access to all the plants at Little Valley Wholesale Nursery. But the ones he ends up using are mostly Plant Select plants. So he has some of the white over there. That's the stun daisy. That's lavender mist, which is another one of these delicate looking plants. Totally can take sun and drought and in shade. It's a great plant, and it's long lived. There's other ones back in there. He has a Phedra and Patchy Plume and Blonde Ambition. But, we're still searching for a style in Colorado. That's kind of what we're looking for. When I go by this house, this is in Lakewood, I can go, oh gosh, yeah, that's cool. But then in my head, I'm thinking, it's because that is such a contemporary architecture that's acceptable. You know what I'm saying? I kind of go, then it makes sense. But it shouldn't be that way. We should have these kinds of landscapes in every style, in front of every style of house. And I think the reason we don't is because we think it's too complicated. So I've done a lot of maintenance in my life. I'm trying to simplify the maintenance and really measure out whether or not mowing lawns will take more time than actually maintaining a garden bed. It depends on how you maintain it. But here's another house up in Fort Collins. A friend of mine, she does the gardening there, and she did all this installation, and there's no turf in front. And that's a really nice home. And it's the only one on the block like that. And I think that's fantastic. What they have up there is Delosperma, the ice plant. So I've been driving around today and I have not seen any ice plants. Do you guys have ice plants down here? Thank you. Because I think that's a Cortez plant. I don't know that it'll grow in Front Range and it's exactly beautiful and showy and stunning. But what I think about Cortez, it's closer to the land of enchantment. And that plant screams enchantment. So I'll show you more pictures of it later. But we need to get used to looking at houses like this and businesses like that. Now this is another friend of mine. If you ever get to hear this person speak, Kenton Seth. He lives in Fruta, and he does these crevice gardens. This is a style of gardening that came from Czechoslovakia about 20 years ago. And basically, they use a real porous media. It's almost crushed refines and very, very little organic material. He inserts these rocks. He bare roots all his plants, which is kind of wild. You're like, whoa, how do you, they look pathetic after you put them in because they don't have anything to stand on. They're just sunk into the ground. But this planting is at 82nd and Sims in Denver on the west side of the pickleball courts. And there's 1,000 genre of species in there. There's something always blooming in that garden. And he maintains this garden and lives in Grand Junction, or Fruta, the same thing. So think about how much time he actually puts into this garden. It gets watered once a week. I think there's plenty of things that we can do to bring style to Colorado. This to me screams like a Colorado style because it has that rock in it, and it's like mountains, but it's different enough to identify as a Colorado sort of style. Anyway, this is, he uses a lot of plant select plants. That one off to the left there is actually Snowmass veronica, which is a hybrid of the Turkish veronica. So it blooms white on the outside, and then the centers are a blue, and it only gets like 2.5 inches tall. Fantastic plant. The junipers in the back are actually Woodward junipers. But I want people to see these kinds of styles and think, oh, that could be a style for Cortez, I walk by these medians every day. The one on the left is in the spring. The one on the right is in the winter or in the late fall. If you were to mow that, you think, how much would come back? Well, I think quite a lot. I want to start a little program called Will It Mow, and then line out all my perennials and just mow them. And I'm sure that most of them will. But when I look at this, I wonder, is there enough, if you reduce the water, will you reduce the weeds? Will you reduce the maintenance? And I think that you can actually get to a point where this style of gardening with perennials will be just as much maintenance or less than having that just be turf, where you're having a monoculture and or something that's just not really interesting. It's not appropriate. So this is the same thing. On one side of the street, there's the turf and tree, and on the other side, there's that wonderful display of plants. I think the one on the left really tells something about the community. It tells something about who we are and where we are in the world. Fort Collins has put a ton of money into their medians. So I get to run around and this is right after it was installed. And they've got some red yucca in here, which is fantastic. They've got some Kentucky coffee trees, blonde ambition, but they also have some failures. So this is something that I talk about. I'm really getting concerned with the weed barrier cloth. We're becoming really casual about just put weed barrier cloth and kill it all. We're just sort of making empty spaces that we're gonna have to deal with at some point. And I show this because what happened was they put this building in about 4 years ago, and they did the landscaping, and it looked gorgeous. And then we had a flood. I didn't know this is what they did. They just went and they put, the flood washed out all the bark, and you see the weed barrier cloth with the little holes. And it's just kind of like, man, have you ever weeded plants from weed barrier cloth? It's hard because the roots go into it. You know what I mean? It's better just not to have it and to put 3 inches of wood mulch or something like that. It's a kind of thinking that, we really should think about what we're doing and just try and cover that space with plants that we want and that are appropriate. There it is on the other side. So there you are, Fort Collins with his pants down. Like to show that picture. Annie covered this a little bit. It's a steppe climate. We studied this as kids, and one of the best examples that I can think of as a steppe climate is that basically your chances of precipitation in inches of precipitation of the year equal the transpiration of the water that's going to evaporate from the earth. And in a steppe climate on the eastern side of Colorado, basically what that is that means we get 15, 14 inches of rain a year, and we lose 14 inches of rain a year. So we're really running a balance of 0 for water. But because we're so smart and we have technology and irrigation, we can tip the scales so that we can grow these plants that we were raised with or our parents were raised with out east, you know, in terms of hydrangeas or, you know, the things that we're really accustomed to inside. It's kind of weird, but we're attracted to it. And that's why I'm like, well, you should think about these things. I think there's a style out there for Colorado that would shout, we're different. And there's 153 plants that people can combine to do that and achieve that style. I just don't know what that style is yet. Uh-oh. Now I'm in trouble. I don't know what happened. Hold on here. Sorry about that. Oh, so now the thing is when I get to Come on. Why isn't it going? You know what? You may have gotten lucky. I may have to stop. Hold on here. I'm saying from current slide. No! Hold on here. That is too funny. I can't believe it. No, it's okay. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe it's like the memory.
Oh, can you shut everything? Shut all the other ones that are on off? Shut that off. Here, yeah.
Ah!
Get rid of that one. What'd you do?
So now I have to go up here. Hold on. Maybe, I think that's maybe what happened. So hold on here. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll close the other one. Oh.
What you gotta do.
Oh no.
There's Jessica. Here, now look up. Wait, your stuff is just on. Here you go.
Oh, okay. So now we're back to this. Thank you. I don't know what happened there. But I'm also trying to make an army of people that are going to say, are going to ask questions every time they go out. Right plant, right place. Okay, so as an arborist, I'm not a certified ISA, but we always go to these things where you don't plant trees under telephone wires, right? Well, this is Kearney, Nebraska. What happened here? Why'd they just butcher all the trees in the parking lot? So they could see the signs. That was it. Now you think about the property value and you think about what these businesses are actually trying to do. They're trying to bring people into a welcoming spot and they just butchered their trees, and that's not really going to recover from them. So we either have to have better planning or better maintenance. And so I want you to look around. This is an easy one to say, oh, right plant, right place. Well, what about this? This is right down the street from me. I look at these trees and I say, we got some Austrian pines in the lawn. What's going on? Austrian pines can live on their own. You know, Pinus edulis, your pinyon pine that are here, you shouldn't see those in lawns. There's no point in watering them. So we need to do something about that. And we could save a lot of water by making a bed of something underneath that and letting those just grow on their own and putting other plants that don't need as much water underneath them and make a nice display and then mow around that whole thing. So simple things that we see every day. You go, gosh, that's pretty normal. What's the heck with that? Well, look at that. Think about how much maintenance those guys, this apartment complex is spending, because every year they go and they shear all their dogwoods, they shear all their Peking cotoneasters in a rock bed that really doesn't have a lot of design. But I'm asking, why not just pick smaller plants? You know, you're paying a lot of money to have somebody do that every year, or let them grow. You know, if they're there to be big, let them grow. But that sort of style of shearing really comes from out west or out east, where things grow so well that you've got to shear them down to keep it back. You know, but we should be planting, these plants won't grow that big out here because of the lack of water. So this is one I show you, and right plant, right place, right maintenance. You know, this is a huge area, and they just got trees in there. This person pretty much signed up to like spray weeds every 2 weeks and or kill whatever's underneath there, but those people in the house can't even use that landscape space because you can't run around on those rocks. So when you think right plant, right place, how do you get ahead of the game? You go in and you see things like this. These are sheared Bloomis spirea that are put into a spot that's only less than a foot wide, and that plant gets 3 feet wide. Take them out. Nobody's going to miss them. Or cut out the lawn, you know, and extend the bed. And then you stopped your maintenance. And you know, just as I know, is if you put a penny in your bank every day, you earn a lot of money. But, you know, the maintenance, the little bit of maintenance that you can save every day is going to buy you a lot in the long run. When plants get like this, take them out. That's it. They're the wrong plant in the wrong place. And we should just accept it and stop doing the maintenance on them. Because everybody who drives by is going, what? How about this one? Right plant, right place. Look at some poor mowing guy. All those medians have to be mowed 28 times a year. That's crazy. That's about what it takes. And you know what else is the problem with this kind of thinking is that, well, they're grass and people accept it. It's a harboring insects that are coming from the east. If we build reservoirs, we build all these water-loving areas, we're going to just invite the insects that are causing the diseases to plants, like green ash or the emerald ash borer or Japanese beetle. So let's just really embrace the dryness, get a style, and create something different. That could be a whole big bed of nice shrubs that are reasonably sized that you can maintain. You know, the problem out at our place is they always go in and use snow removal and knock everything over. So this is in Greeley, Colorado. Yes, I took this picture and I almost died when I saw it because I thought as a kid, this was my dream home. And then I looked and I was like, what was I thinking? Look at the junipers in the lawn. Look at everything so sheared. Is there any sense of style there? He's got acres of green grass. There's a lot of wasted time and energy into this landscape. And I don't know about you, but it does not buy the aesthetic that I would expect putting that kind of money and effort towards it. So there's things that we can do, and when you see this kind of stuff, you need to start asking yourself, is it the right landscape for the right part of the country? That's what you need to start saying. This is a Kelly Grumman's house. I don't know if you've seen him. He's a great big horticulture hero on the Front Range. But he's got his hydrozones where he's got his xeric stuff, and then he has a lawn on the left where he has lots of dogs. And that lawn's not any ordinary lawn. That's actually a hybrid Bermuda grass from Lesotho, South Africa. And this is what he does. He maintains it just like a regular turf, but it's really soft. And it reduces this water. This really doesn't even need water over the course of the year. If you didn't mow it, it would only get 4 inches tall. It's a warm season grass. If you're considering like a buffalo grass, this could be a strong competitor for it because it'll wear better through the wintertime. And I'm showing a lot of this grass because I really think when I got a plug of this grass back 5 years ago, 6 years ago now actually, and I planted it at my house because everybody that I hear, you know, and I know Bermuda grass, just don't mess with it. It's an invasive weed. But I found it to be have a lot of weaknesses. So this is a median in Fort Collins, and they put plugs in because they don't have sod yet. Nobody's growing it for sod. But they plugged it in the spring and it all grew together except for under the tree. There wasn't enough light, which is really weird because I would have thought that was enough light for a plant, but it really has some serious weaknesses. It's not going to run everywhere because it just hates shade. But when I show this picture to people in municipalities on the Front Range, they go, oh, I get it. It's a natural tree ring. Now I won't have the mower guys trimming and girdling all my trees because the grass doesn't grow there. So you put wood mulch on it and you have a nice little display of something that's appropriate for the size of the tree ring along with the drip line and the light. This is my house actually, and that's the plug of grass I just wanted to show you. I do have bluegrass, and I put that plug kind of by the rock at the bottom of the tree, and it grew into my gravel driveway. And the bluegrass doesn't grow into the gravel driveway because there's no water, and that plant doesn't like to go into the Kentucky bluegrass. So you can't actually change over your turf by just plugging it in. You actually have to kill the bluegrass. I wanted to show a little bit of it. This is at Denver Botanic Gardens where it's unmowed. And if you see that little pink that's in the middle, that's one of those Dioecia, the Coral Canyon twin spur. Then if you were to look at it in the wintertime, that's in the wintertime. Now a lot of people go, eee, but that could be another style. It's only going to be green for 4.5 months of the year. So in mid-May, it'll start to get green. And then by September, it's going to be, late September, it's going to turn brown again. But it opens up the opportunity for planting a lot of other things. And that's why I really like it. And imagine school districts mowing only, well, I'll talk about it later, but not even mowing in the fall. Think about it. When I go to drop my kids off, it's like those guys are there until, Thanksgiving, mowing. You could save a lot of time. I wanted to show this other medians. This is a really well done median. This is Rus trilobata, which is that sumac underneath Russian hawthorns. This is a median over at Stapleton in Colorado. I thought that was wonderful. Now they trim that bottom part pretty hard every year to give it a sort of formal look, but I bet you it doesn't take long. Then there is this very simple planting. This is a plant select plant called Pawnee Butte sand cherry. So sand cherries normally get really huge, 6 feet tall or more, and then this one only grows to about 20 inches or less, 16 inches, and it creeps out 2.5 feet, just about the size of that. Those plants have probably been in there for, I don't know when they redid that bed, but that's right in front of my office. So I'm thinking it's somewhere around 10 or so more years. The juniper on the far end, that's going to be a maintenance hassle. I don't know what they're thinking. But that's the Pawnee Buttes, when it blooms in the springtime, early spring, you'll have clusters of little itty bitty flowers that just as the leaves emerge all along the stems. And then in the fall, they're always red. A nice, beautiful orange-red color. So this is the game changer for maintenance. And like I said, I'm a maintenance kind of guy. I grew up my business was maintenance and installation. I worked at Botanic Gardens where I had to choose. I had the perennial border, which is a very high visibility garden, and people walk up and down it every day like crowds. So when I go in to trim something, I have to do it on the sly. So I have to make sure something else is looking really good before I chop something else down. But I do that just so that I can rejuvenate it, because by the time those other flowers start to fade, then this one will just be coming back in as a really nice plant. And so what I look for is using this tool to quickly get in and get out. I didn't have the opportunity to use battery-operated hand shears. I had to use the cord, and I cut it 1,000,000 times. But since I'm a maintenance kind of fanatic, I actually put on our website, if you look towards the bottom there, you see yearly annual commercial maintenance. So I've got commercial maintenance for every one of my plants, which means like when you buy a car, you get a maintenance plan, right? They tell you at 100,000 you got to change timing belt. Well, here you go. Every year you can see this is what I'm going to be committed to, and or every 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of plants in there that have like really no maintenance. What do you do with an ice plant? Nothing. You let it grow. You give it a little bit of water and let it expand and show itself. So I think that's really cool. And if you download the Excel spreadsheet, you're actually going to be able to sort your plants by perennial and then by maintenance. Very useful. And so for commercial people, I'm always like, hey, look, you can make these sheets. You can make these sheets. When to maintain, hand trim, cut back, deadhead. And you'll actually know when your crews are going out to say, oh, there it is. And so the pink that's in there for each plant, it's hard to read which plants they are, but each plant is, the pink is when it's in bloom. There's a person at Denver Botanic Gardens named Ann Fraser who actually went out for the past since 2012, and she's been documenting at what time our plants come into bloom. And then those pinks are highlighted, faded darker or lighter due to the amount of blooms that were actually on the plant. So that's really kind of cool. And you have a picture of the plant. You could take all your mower people and actually say, look, can you understand what the maintenance is on these plants? Because there's a picture of the plant, there's when it blooms, there's what you do when you maintain it. Hand trim, mow down, or trim, cut back. So then like this guy again, think about him. He's mowing 28 times a year, I guarantee it. That's a lot of times to mow. That's 1,000 that's thousands of dollars. If he were to do dog tough, it would be 12 times a year. Whoops. Which means he would have mowed in May, and then only when it's green and starting to grow, which you'll go May maybe twice, then June you'll go 4 times, then July you'll go 3 or 4 times, and then come August you'll go back to 2, and once in September maybe, and you're done. And then it'll stay cut that same height all winter long because it won't grow. So for the past 2 years, Plant Select has actually supported a grad student to study which native bees are attracted to Plant Select plants at CSU, and it's done through a, what do they call it, a volunteer service. But anyway, not a service, citizen science. But anyway, did you know that there's 900 native bees to Colorado? I didn't know that. They don't even know what those bees, most of those bees do. They're so hard to identify, they break them down into 9 groups, and then they have to have CSU experts. They look at them under a microscope of what they are. And then there was 461 native bee species in Larimer County alone. And I'm sure that there's tons down here, and we just don't know what the heck they're doing. But this is some of the report that they got back. It shows how many bee visits, and if you look at the Anchusa, the Cape Forget-Me-Not, you can see 197 there. They had a lot of bee visits. They had a lot of honeybees, which are not native, but they also had some of the most of the native bees, which is like 7. And if you go down to Clematis integrifolia, a non-native plant, you get 26 bumblebees. Anyway, that report will be coming out, I hope, soon. The grad student is now an extension agent in Arapahoe County. So I have this sheet that I showed you. Actually, you can download it from our garden, or from our website. It's 27 pages long, but then you can plan the pollinating of your garden if you're concerned about that. So you can see, you just arrange the pink to cover the whole year. And I just picked through these kind of quickly, because this is our 2019 Plant Select plants, and you have that in your hand. This is pine leaf penstemons, which are native to New Mexico. Great plant, stays compact, blooms all summer. Orange on the outside, yellow on the inside of the flower, and when you stand back, it looks like a melon kind of color. The leaves are actually sort of evergreen, so you actually will have a green plant throughout the rest of the year. Stepson's Sunset Glow. A lot of times with the plant names, I get a hard time with the retailers. They say, why are you naming all these things like Sunset, or Stepsons, or Granita, or Undaunted, or Windwalker? Those are all to pay homage to the people who brought the plants to the program. Stepsons, when you see that, will represent Mike Bone, who's the propagator at Denver Botanic Garden. He's a big biker guy, got a beard down to here, tattooed up to gore, and then he likes to talk about little piney flowers that are so cute. You'll have to meet him sometime. Anyway, that's that plant. It's a wonderful plant. Granita, orange ice plant. This is a hybrid between fire spinner and another ever-blooming plant. It's a very tough plant. It was blooming after our first snow last year. When you see Granita, I want you to think of Sandy, Utah, because the person there, John Steierman, is the person that submitted these. And he did that in his garden. Now, is that not kind of an enchanted planting? I think it's pretty beautiful, and you get lots of hybrids, but that's something I can see around here. This is Salvia lemonii, which is a native plant. In West, bloom all summer long. There it is in our trial beds. It's not like Salvia gregii, where I think Vic might be saying, oh my God, that one wasn't really hardy. And I had problems with it too, and so I was really careful about picking this one, or at least voting for it, because at least this one is the only one in the trial gardens that had consistent growth year after year. It was fantastic. Here's the undaunted alpine plume grass, which is native to the Alps. It's wonderful in a breeze, arching, and it blooms in July. Those gold kind of flowers or panicles, a fantastic plant. Sucker's Punch tree, which is a native actually. It's got genetics from Persia, but it's actually a native of the U.S., Prunus virginiana. This was submitted by Scott, and in the spring you get these clusters of small white flowers, and bees and everything loves them. The foliage emerges green. It's kind of like a Canada Red, but it has better structure. But as the leaves mature, about 2 weeks later, they turn purple. Now, the best part about this plant is it doesn't sucker, because Canada Reds are just notorious for that. Here it is with green and purple on it, because it'll have a second flush of growth, and you'll see that combination. We'll quickly run through these. This is actually the 2020 plants for Plant Select. This is Dracocephalum ruchiana. That's going to be a great plant. It's a low-growing plant, blue flowers all summer, kind of snapdragon looking. This is a plant that's growing at Pat Hayward's yard. She is the previous director of Plant Select. It's a silver foliage Stachy's lavendifolia. We're calling it Pink Candy. Lamb's ear. It creeps out a little, but it's a fantastic xeric plant. This is going to be its brother, sort of. It's another Salvia lavendulifolia, but it's green foliage, and it puts on a lot more blooms, and it's great to grow because it's better than the regular genus, where this one is called Pink Cotton Lamb's ear. So you have to get both to get Pink Cotton Candy. That's the deal. Here's another Artemisia arboritanum. Leprechaun, and this is another Kelly Grumman sort of introduction. It's a poof ball of an Artemisia that's just completely green. It's wonderful. If you wanted to have a summertime boxwood hedge looking thing, this would be the plant. There it is, and they're all the same, and there's no maintenance on those. This is a fantastic plant, which I think everybody should adopt. It's one of the most beautiful things in spring. It's going to be it's Thermopsis lupinoides. It's actually from Russia. It blooms, the one at my house is just starting to bloom right now. And it's such a fresh breath of fresh air. I used to maintain this plant at Denver Botanic Gardens, and it just opens up its bloom right at the right time. It's amazing. Anyway, it gets to about 2.5 feet tall. I like those mid-sized plants. They're manageable. I don't like plants that creep too much. Anyway, that's close up. Clematis hexapetalia, Mongolian snowflakes, another bluebird plant. It's fantastic. It lodges as well, but very xeric and the purest white you'll ever see for blooms. I put this out there because this is a gamble oak. You guys know what a gamble oak is. Short and kind of suckers. This is a 60-foot one that I'd love to see in the program. There's a whole population of them down in Gila, New Mexico. That's a 60-foot tall gamble oak, and if you look at the acorns, they're small, the leaves are small. It's Scott Kelly and Dawn Davenport at the bottom. This one didn't come out. This is out of Colorado Springs. This is a Chartreuse Rus trilobata, and I bring these plants up because you all have yards and you see weird plants. Call me, because I'm looking for plants that do well in Colorado. You know, take note of it. That's how these plants get into the program. Anyway, that's my presentation. We do have an annual meeting June 11th where we have a climatologist, David Solomon, if you're familiar with High Country Gardens, and John Fielder are speaking. Be a great thing to come to at Denver Botanic Gardens. So thank you. All right. No questions? I do have books if you want, but they're $20. But I did bring that Plant Select book. It's great eye candy if you want. So, if you want to look through it too.
So where else can we buy it?
I don't know.
It's on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon
on
too.
Amazon?
If you want to go there, I don't think. Vic, you don't carry that Pretty Tough Plants book? No. Do you carry books? Okay. A lot of nurseries don't carry the books because they get all dirty. So I have it here, or you go to Amazon, or so. No? Thank you very much for coming along. Appreciate it. Oh, come on up.
Oh, you're
Yeah, you're supposed to come up.
My name's David Rainey. I live here in Cortez, and I have a dumb question from a dumb gardener. Virtually everything I've planted that's native.
Stop just a minute, the mic's not on.
almost virtually everything I've planted that's native in my yard. I don't know where it was an oil dispensary or what it was, but everything dies. I've pampered some of them. I've let some of them do their own thing, and they all...
Yeah. Have you done a soil sample
What?
of the area? Have you done a soil sample of the area to see what there is in there? You know, it'll tell you if it's really basic, it might be super basic, and a lot of times the native plants, unless you see them right down the road, you know, growing, you know, native plants from the plains might not be as great out here. It just might be that kind of a case, but I would start with a soil sample. Yeah.
Even though
it's supposed to grow out here.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have a suspicion about soil, I'd start there.
Okay, I have a couple that, one is joint fir.
Oh, yeah? That one's dying on you? Really?
I told you I was a dumb gardener.
I gotta go see this. Take my card, email me tonight. I do, because that is one of the toughest plants there are. As a matter of fact, in sandy soils, that can be an aggressive plant, almost to the point where it gets me worried about it. Now, I'm thinking about the ephedra that is plant select. There is also the Mormon tea ephedra, which
That's
is
the one I'm
ephedra
talking
what is it, virens, yeah. That one I don't know as much about, and I know that one's not gonna take over like the one in our program. But Vic might actually have an idea. I don't know. No idea. Okay, thanks. No? All right. Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you for coming, and I just want to remind folks again that if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, but you want to learn something about trees or edible gardening, Four Seasons, yours is at what time, Vic? At 10 o'clock. He's going to talk about growing plants that you can eat that will also be attractive additions to your landscaping. And then David Teppel, who's in the back as well, is going to talk about 10 top trees to grow in this area that are water-wise. So spring is coming, and I know we're all getting anxious to start doing some planting and working in our yards. So be sure you choose the right kinds of plants, because it'll save you time and energy, and most importantly, it'll save you water. So thank you again for coming tonight. Tell your friends, they can go online and watch this.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. It was great. I was making mental notes for, we just moved to a new house, and so I was going to be gardening this year.
Everybody's gonna watch.
Thank you. I know, I'm thinking to myself, okay.
So tomorrow, we're going to meet here again.
Right, yes.